Everyone, good afternoon, good evening. I don't think we have any good mornings, but I'm Stephanie Battaglino. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. I'm coming to you from the Southern California desert in Palm Desert, California. I see we have a couple of Californians on the call, Fat and Paolo, and thank you. I can't chat with you directly, but I can see the chat, so don't worry. I can respond if things come through on chat. I'll be able to see the polls. We'll have some polls. I'm just really thrilled to do this. This is great. And just to give you a little bit of background, and I'll get to my slides in a second. Santa Barbara, California. California's showing up today. This is all good. So I just want you to know this is it's just great for me to do this. Because I have such an association with Out and Equal. As some of you on the webinar with me know, those of you that know me, and there's familiar names there, Doug, for example. I just wanted you to know that I've been associated with Out and Equal for a very long time, actually. They used to have advisory committees, and I was on the transgender advisory committee for nearly 10 years. And in that time, I think my first summit was 2005 in Washington, DC. And I've probably been to 9 or 10 in that period of time. And I have to tell you, my first Out and Equal, and if some of you that are on, if you can just let me know on chat if this is your first Out and Equal Summit, I'd love to see that because it was life-changing for me. It was networking on steroids. It was everything. And I'll never forget, I think I ran out of business cards after like the first day. But it was so wonderful to be in community with such like-minded individuals. And I hope, even though it's a virtual situation this year, that you guys are in the same place. I see Joe Hernandez, first time from Guadalajara. Welcome, mi amigo. I just think that it's a great place to share ideas, to share experiences, to raise each other up. Because you guys know, your age, we raise one person up, we raise up the whole community, right? And so I'm just so thrilled that Out and Equal has been able to do this, and I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. I don't mean to start my webinar off on a somber note, but I just want to recognize something, and I'd like to ask all of you for just a quick moment of silence. As some of you may or may not have seen, we lost through violent death our 31st transgender person in the last couple of days in Augusta, Georgia, Felicia. And we had 27 deaths in the United States in all of 2019. We're on October 8th, guys, and there's 31 already. If that's not the definition of an epidemic, if that's not the definition of a systemic problem, then I don't know what is. So I would ask all of us to just take a few seconds, if you wouldn't mind, just let's just close our eyes for just a moment and for a moment of silence for not only Felicia, but for the 30 other trans people that have died in the United States this year. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate that. So here we are. We're going to change the world in 60 minutes. And how are we going to do that? Well, for those of you that don't know who I am, I thought I should just introduce myself. So my name is Stephanie Battaglino. I worked in corporate for for 40 years. I spent time at AT&T. And most recently, before my retirement last year, I was a corporate vice president at the New York Life Insurance Company in New York City. I was there for 20 years. I came out in 2005. And when I came out in 2005, On the job, I was the first trans person, the first appointed officer of the company to come out on the job in the then 164-year history of the company. And I have to tell you, I was worried that they were going to run me out of town on a rail. Conservative life insurance company. I mean, you can't get any more brick and mortar than that, right? And what I was concerned about was that, you know, they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't want any problems, so they were going to just fire me. It would be the easiest thing to do. But a crazy thing happened. They did not do that. It was not about my job. It was about how can we make this transition as comfortable as we can for you. And I was shocked, but pleasantly so. But the thing is, they didn't know what to do. And so I had to lead them through the process, you know, things like transition guidelines, which we developed in that trans advisory committee I was making mention of just a bit ago. You know, they weren't widely known back then. You know, some of the more progressive companies certainly had them, but they weren't as pervasive as they are today. And so I'll never forget, I showed up at my first meeting with the 2 HR vice presidents. I got 2 HR vice presidents to work with me that were assigned to me. And I'll never forget, I walked into the first meeting presenting as myself, my true self. And I got deer in the headlight look. One, because I think they were concerned, they had never seen me before, the real me. And I didn't think, and thinking back on it, I don't think they knew that I was going to show up looking like that, looking like me. And but the other thing was, I don't think they knew what to do. You know, their heads were swimming. I mean, there's so many things to change, all this kind of stuff. So I had worked up like a 20-point agenda of all the things that needed to be changed. And I said, I think this will guide our conversation today. And I handed it to them. and you could see their expressions change, like, oh, okay, good. We have a roadmap. We didn't have a roadmap before. And believe it or not, it was that instance really that made me realize that there's a bigger calling for me in my life. As I said to them further on down the line, I said, you know, I am not the first person that's going to transition here. There will be others after me. So it's important that, you know, the learnings that we have and the experiences we have that we work out together, we are able to apply to those that follow me, because that's certainly going to happen. And that's what kind of gave rise to what ultimately became my speaking and consulting and training business, which is Follow Your Heart LLC, which actually is now stephaniebattaglino.com. And because it's a calling for me. I mean, I think all of us gathered together on this webinar have a passion for D&I work, for inclusion, for equity in the workplace, right? And I certainly share your passion, but for me too, it really is a calling. I believe I was put on the face of this earth to move the needle in a positive direction for the trans community in the workplace, because that's the arena that I knew the best. I mean, 40 years in corporate, my God, you know, I kind of knew my way around the corporate hallways. And if that was where I could make the biggest difference, then so be it. And I ask all of you to think the same way. You know, where can I make the biggest difference? Where can I move the needle in a positive direction? Where can I push out the envelope? And I'm going to give you some tips and tricks about that as we move forward, okay? So one other thing, shameless plug. I do have a book coming out next spring in April of 2021, which kind of chronicles all of this sort of stuff. It's called Reflections from Both Sides of the Glass Ceiling, Finding My True Self in Corporate America, because as I like to tell people when I'm speaking at events and whatnot, the good news was I assimilated into the female workforce at New York Life. The bad news was I assimilated into the female workforce at New York Life. So suddenly I found myself without any male privilege as like a white guy in the workplace. And I thought that I suddenly was working with a bunch of transphobic people. But as it turned out, it really had nothing to do with me being trans. It had everything to do with me being seen as a woman. And there's a lot of stories and a lot of travails and a lot of whatevers that I recount in the book, because it's just, it's a rather unique perspective, right? You know, I'm switching teams here in the middle of my life at 45 years old when I came out. And so it's it's all about that. And if you want to know more about it or be on the list to get updates on when it's coming out or whatnot, just visit my website and shoot me an email. I would love to do that. I'm on the board right now of PFLAG National. I hope that is an organization that you're all familiar with. My dear friend and colleague, Jean Marie Nevada, had done a webinar earlier in the summit. I hope you guys had the pleasure of hearing her speak because she is just awesome. I used to be on the board of the LGBTQ Community Center in New York City, as well as TILDEF, the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. So I've been involved in the community. I believe that all kind of comes part and parcel with being involved and in my calling. I already talked to you about my O&E experience, so let's move on. So why do I do what we do? Why do I do what I do? Well, this is it in a nutshell. I think it starts and ends with education. You know, when we as trans people have to deal with hate and whatnot, hate typically is rooted in fear, and fear is rooted in not knowing and creating all these false realities. And you break through that by starting first with educating yourself about what the trans community is. And then my hope has always been that as you move through that education, you begin to develop an understanding, whether or not you have a trans person in your life or not, or as a colleague, whether it's a colleague or a family member or a friend. And you become to get, I think you then start to develop a greater level of understanding. And then for me, ultimately, it's about having that understanding, sow the seeds of acceptance, right? Because if we're ever going to get to a workplace that is fully inclusive and fully equal, where we are all celebrated for our differences and what we bring to the table, that's where we have to be. So this has always been my motto going forward. From the day I started, from the first time I spoke at a company to today, this is what buttresses everything that I do. And I wanted to make sure that you knew that. So let's move on. There are some table stakes. And I'll talk about this a little bit. You know, does your company have 100 on the Corporate Equality Index? Or are you close? That's important. And feel free to pop in chat what your latest CEI score was. I'd love to see it. Actually, I have a poll about that too later on, so you'll have a chance to interact with me as well. Do you have all the policy work done? Gender identity, gender expression is in your EEO and your non-discrimination policies. By now, it probably should be. If it's not, you got some work to do. But I'd like to think that the majority of you that are on with me today, your companies are in that place. And workplace transition guidelines, have you memorialized them? You know, and then the other question is, how many people, and if you could put the answer in chat, that would be awesome. How many people, how many of you in your companies have out trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming colleagues that you know of? You know, it's interesting. I have done work with companies where, you know, they have been very progressive in their policy creation and then moving from policy to practice. And I would sit there and I would ask them, I'm like, so you have out trans employees, right? And they're like, nope, not that we know of. I said, but you're still going through all this, right? And they're like, well, of course we are, because it's the right thing to do. And if I heard that once, I've heard that a number of times in my experience working with companies, and that's a wonderful thing. That's a really wonderful thing. So just keep those things in mind, especially with transition guidelines, because that seems to be the one that's always kind of trailed the rest of them. You know, but there's been so much great work done that's available online, available on Out and Equal, where you can find those, you know, and then customize them to the specific situations, specific cultures and whatnot that you have in your companies. Something to keep in mind. So what I'll be talking about today is really about broadening the conversation. It's about expanding the narrative. And in a very real way, and this is why I asked you about how you're doing on your Corporate Equality Index score. It's not about resting on your CEI laurels. I remember I spoke at an HRC event in New York City for all the New York City metro area companies that had just gotten a 100 on the latest CEI index. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. And so I'm sitting on this panel and everybody in the audience is all feeling really good about themselves. And then of course, you know, the trans chick is the one that goes, so you're feeling good about yourself, right? Well, the work's not done yet. And, you know, and they're all looking at me like, what? I didn't expect this. You know, it's like, you know, don't kill my buzz. But really, you know, the work isn't done. You can't rest on your laurels. It's great. I mean, I remember what it was like at New York Life when we got our 100 for the first time, especially after the HRC had upped the ante, if you will, on the requirements to include trans inclusive health benefits. You had to have that to get your 100, and you all remember that, I'm sure. So when we got there, when we got back there, because we lost our 100, and then we had to get the benefits in place to get the 100 back, it was a big deal. You know, we all in our employee resource group, which we call NIL Pride, NYL Pride, we pronounce it NIL Pride. You know, we're all patting ourselves on the back for that, and we should. But it was all about what's left to do, because there's always something to do, right? There's always something to move forward with. So, so that's what I talk about, not resting on your laurels. Yeah, and I love what Jennifer said, the work will never be done as we grow as a community. And that is so true, Jennifer, that is so true. You know, if I can comment on that just very quickly. You know, I thought, quite frankly, that this, you know, policy to practice, what I've been using, what is my mantra, you know, you'll see it on all of my stuff on my website and whatnot. You know, I've been talking about this for a number of years now, you know, and I always thought that, well, we're going to hit a spot where it's not going to matter anymore. Well, you know, kind of to what Jennifer is referring to, it's always going to be there, because companies are always evolving. The organization is always evolving. The people that are entering the organization, the LGBTQ plus identified individuals that are entering the organization, is evolving as well. And we're going to talk about that. So keep that in mind. So when I talk about moving from policy to practice, quite frankly, it's where the narrative is headed. Where have we been? You know, for the last X number of years, it's about policy and procedure creation, pardon me. And policy and process, in my view, it addresses situations. It's great. It looks good on an intranet website, and it's a good reference. But where we need to get to, and I know a lot of companies are engaged in this, is the practical application of these policies. That's where we need to be. You know, the lifeblood of our companies, of your companies, is the personal interactions that we have every single day, you know, that drive our business processes, that drives us toward our corporate goals, our departmental goals, all that kind of stuff. We have to work together. We have to interact. We have to embrace each other. And that's why language and engagement is so important, because it addresses all these underlying human interactions. You know, I tell that to you, many of you be like, well, I kind of get that, but you'd be surprised how many don't. Because it's important from the aspect of imbuing your culture with these policies and practices, you know, treating people with respect. It's things that you would think about every single day in your own life in terms of how you conduct yourself. But it's important, I think, to understand the impact of all of that in your organization and where we're headed, because it is about cultural transformation for me. And it's moving from like a programmatic sort of mindset to a more systemic, enterprise-wide mindset. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, so I kind of alluded to this just a slide ago or so. You know, the game has already changed. You know, I'm a baby boomer, for crying out loud. Albeit on the far end of the baby boom, you can try to calculate my age if you like, but I'm not telling. Anyway, what I think is important here, and it's the place for our first poll and for our first chat, is you know, an intergenerational reality really has arrived in our workplaces, right? And you guys see this every single day. You know, especially those of you, and like, for example, for me at New York Life, you know, I was kicking around there for 20 years. You know, the New York Life that I retired from in 2019 was a very different place in terms of the makeup of our workforce. And when I joined the company in 2000, our companies don't operate in a vacuum. Society changes around us, right? So the question that I have is, how are you reacting to that change? How are you reacting to that evolution within your company, right? And I just thought this was interesting. There's I have a son. He's in the Gen Y.1 category here on this slide. But all these people are in your company now. Some of you may self-identify in this group that are on this call. I wouldn't know, but you know who you are. And what I say is the LGBTQ plus people that fall into these generations, they're coming to the workplace with a much different set of expectations. And for example, I had as a baby boomer when I came out in 2005. I was 45 years old. I'm making it easier now for you to calculate my age. But anyway, I was 45 years old when I came out at New York Life. As a baby boomer, I was told they didn't fire me. My bar was set pretty low, right? But for younger generations of LGBTQ plus employees, especially those that are trans identified, that identify as trans, they have their journey of transition has started at a lot younger stage in their life than mine. So they're coming to the workplace with a completely different set of expectations. This whole notion of the gender continuum versus the gender binary that I grew up in, that's still around, obviously, but we know that the continuum is where we're headed, and arguably these individuals have embraced a greater sense of gender expression, which is really what shows up at the workplace before anything else, right? Before anybody utters the first word out of their mouth. So that's a part of it. So what I'd like to see in the poll is, do you have, in your companies, do you have an ability for your employees to self-identify as LGBTQ plus in your database? That was something that we got to later in my journey with New York Life, but we did get it, where you could actually self-identify that way. So I'm just curious, and I think it would be great for people to see in the poll kind of where we are at with that. And then I think what's important for you to think about, and please share in chat, is, do you have any sense of what these percentages might look like among your LGBTQ plus employees? I know they don't walk around, I know they don't walk around in the hallways with like a sign on their head, but I'd be curious to see what it's like. And obviously, if you're a global company, that's just another overlay. That's something to think about. Okay. So I don't know that I can see your polls, and there's a reason for that, but I think you guys can, and that's important. So let me move on then, and answer and proffer the question, why is this important to you? As if I have to ask, right? But it's important for these reasons. It affects your entire enterprise. It's about talent acquisition. It's about recruitment. It's about onboarding. It's about retention. It's about career development. It's about internal movement and advancement within the organization, within the enterprise. Looking at the very top there, top talent, and for those of you that are HR professionals that are on this call, on this webinar, recruiting top talent from an ever diversifying pool of candidates, it's getting trickier and trickier. It's harder and harder. And at the end of the day, if you don't, if you're not hip to the vibe, as we like to say, and you're turning somebody off at the interview stage, well, there's certainly, because you don't know how to speak to them, for example, whether I would like to think all of us do not consciously want to be disrespectful to our fellow human being. But if you don't know what to say, you might say the wrong thing and it puts somebody off. And then they're going to go and work for your competitor who gets it better than you do. And that individual, who could be the best and the brightest person that ever walked through your door, they're not going to work for you. They're going to work for your competitor. And potentially your competitor will wind up with a competitive advantage over you. And that's the last thing you want to have. But that's a real thing, and that happens. And that's why what I'm talking with you about today is so important, because it does cover the entire enterprise, okay? Let's see, I'm just looking at the chat here for just a second. See if we have anything in here. Whoops, sorry about that. Most are either not out or straight passing. You can, but it's not public. I guess that's about identification. I want it in our internal directory. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. And that was from Jennifer, I do believe. You know, obviously it's important to restate confidentiality. And Liz, you're a doll for saying that about me. It must be the lighting. I'll move. And Liz knows what she said, what she posted. I'll move on. Oh man, that was funny. So poll number 2, I'd love to know what your CEI score is. You know, and if it's not 100, don't be bashful. It's okay. It's a work in progress. But I'd love to know what it is, because like I mentioned before, but it bears repeating. The journey to full workplace equality for trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people does not end with a score of 100. It just doesn't. You know, and I'd like to think we all know this, but you know, it's very important. I see Intuit's got 100, Dell's got 100, Wells Fargo, you better have 100, Deloitte, you better have 100. Stanley Black & Decker, I didn't know you guys were together now with all the tools. That's very good. UT is 100. Walmart, of course, 100. Ashley, that's awesome. And I have a warm place in my heart for Walmart, only because they're a huge partner of PFLAG National, I must admit. So anyway, that is wonderful. Apple 100, of course. HP, Citigroup, Toyota. You know, take great pride in that, right? I mean, that's a lot of hard work. You know, that's a lot of internal advocacy, right? You know, that you have done through your employee resource group. You know, and it's about, you know, and it's also through, I would imagine, right? You guys tell me, you have to recruit, you know, awesome executive sponsors that will take your concerns and your proposals into the C-suite for consideration and implementation. That's what we had to do at New York Life. And that's when I didn't think there'd ever be, you know, any room for that. But there was, and we were persistent about it, as I'm sure all of you were. So congratulations to all you guys. That is just awesome. That is just awesome. So moving on. So when I specifically talk about moving from policy to practice, what am I talking about? I'm really talking about the 3 C's, which I like to call them. It's cultural acuity, it's communication and language, and it's continual education. Continual, because it never ends. It never ends. There's always an opportunity for education. There's always an opportunity to learn more and to understand at a deeper level, like I said earlier. So we're going to talk about all these things. We're going to break them down. I've got about a little over half an hour left. So forgive me if I start talking fast. I've drank a lot of coffee. So I will tell you up front with culture, I'm a bit of a culture wonk. I think it all started when I was in my MBA program and I went to my first organizational behavior class, and it was just amazing. You know, all the weird stuff that was going on in the company I was working at the time, and it wasn't New York Life or AT&T, was kind of explained through the organizational behavior class. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So, but here's the thing about culture. You know, everything, and it may not be the thing that you think about every single day, but it is around you. It surrounds you every single day. The work you do at Apple, HP, Walmart, Target, wherever you're from on this call, from Stanley Black & Decker, you know, that culture is around you every single day. You don't do your work in a vacuum, right? You know, all the work that happens in your company, especially the decisions are made, the strategic decisions that are made, or the decisions that are made to move forward with projects that you might be, you know, when you hit those key decision points, that's when you really see culture come out, I think. But that's the backdrop within which you do all your work, right? I mean, it is. You just don't think about it every day. But but you're surrounded by it. You're surrounded by it. And it could be your history, it could be your legacy and legends, as they're called, your rituals and routines, your symbols. And I'll give you an example to kind of get you thinking before you put your ideas into chat. At New York Life, one of our biggest symbols is the building. We call it the home office at New York Life. 51 Madison Avenue, shows up in a lot of TV shows. It's right near Madison Square Park. In the Flatiron District of New York City. Those of you that have been in New York City might know where that is, or that are from the East Coast might know where that is. The building is iconic. It is a registered historical place in the city of New York. It is, in any overhead shot of the city of the island of Manhattan, you see it. That's a huge symbol of strength for New York Life. Always is. And then in my last 10 years at the company, I was involved in external meetings and conferences. And one of the big things, it was a ritual. We used to have what we called council meetings. We still call them that. And what they are is essentially incentive business meetings for our agents, because, without getting into all the gory details, New York Life insurance products are sold by our agent force, 10,000 strong from coast to coast, and obviously our top performing agents are brought to these meetings with their families for not only an educational experience, but to celebrate and to break bread. And that has been that's a ritual and a routine that has been a part of New York Life for literally decades. And the company this year celebrated its 175th anniversary. So, but what you do in your ERGs in terms of moving your initiatives forward occurs within this cultural landscape. And I think that's very important for you to understand. And I have a couple of terms for that. It's cultural velocity and cultural elasticity. And what I mean by that is, very simply, cultural velocity. How nimble is your company? How quickly does it adjust to change? At New York Life, and it's gotten better now, and I mean no ill will, but more than one person explained the culture to me as glacial. So that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about when I say cultural velocity. And when I say cultural elasticity, what I'm talking about is how much room is there for growth? How much can you push the envelope out on your initiatives? Like, say, just for example, self-identification is something that you keep coming up against a brick wall on. Well, clearly culture's pushing back for some reason. And it's important for you to understand what's happening, as you seek to kind of work with that and continue moving forward. What affects all of this is societal change. It's generational change. This is companies are living, breathing organisms, and they function within a larger living and breathing organism, which is all of your target markets, and all of and society as a whole, right? And what can work against this is unconscious bias. You run across this a lot. We see it in microaggressive behavior, right? And these are things that should send off little red flags in your head about, well, here's where we're dealing with some resistance, because you can use that and work it into whatever your work plan is, and perhaps recruiting an executive that maybe isn't exactly, doesn't toe the line as much, might be someone who really kind of gets it a little bit better than some of the others, that might be able to advocate more effectively for you. Just using that as an example, okay? So, because again, is your culture getting in the way? That's what I'm talking about. And only you know that. And I think that's important for you to understand. So let's talk about communication and language. That's the big thing. There's so much talk about pronouns. Out and Equal put out a great piece that's on their website about pronouns in the workplace. If you haven't read it, if you haven't downloaded it, you should. It's really good. It's really, really good. Because at the end of the day, for someone for individuals that don't have a trans person in their lives in any capacity, you know, what do I say is a very real question. I've been involved in training the city agencies of New York City in trans inclusive training for about 4 years now. And this is the biggest thing. Every single training session, this is the biggest thing, because people don't want to say the wrong thing. They are very flummoxed by a trans person. And, you know, and then they kind of shrink up a little bit because they don't want to say the wrong thing. So if you fall into that category, or at least partially into that category, then I think this will be helpful for you. So, you know, it's about terminology. I think a lot of people feel like the trans community, as well as the LGBTQ plus community at large, we have our own language. You know, some people, it sounds like it's Greek, you know, and I get that. But it's a lot about pronouns, and we'll talk some about that. But here's my big thing. It's how do you deliver it? You can say all the right words. You can be hip to all the lingo, but at the end of the day, you got to feel it inside. That's where authentic intent comes from. That's where thoughtfulness and mindfulness come from. It's believing it in your heart that respectfully treating someone is the only way to treat someone. So, you know, that's important, and I don't want you to forget that, because as we get into a lot of the language, it's, you know, I don't want it to seem like, you know, suddenly I've turned into an English professor, but lots of times when we teach about language, we kind of have to. So what I like to start off with is just framing language. Our language is framed by, and I love this slide because it really covers all of the dimensions of our language, you know, birth, sex, gender expression, sexual orientation, gender identity. And as you can see, there are continuums for all of them, you know, for the, you know, and I think it's important for us to understand that these dimensions aren't just, you know, for trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people. We all exist on this framework somewhere. You know, for those Star Trek fans out there, you know, this is like four-dimensional chess, you know, that Spock and used to play with whoever he played it with, I forget. But you know what I'm saying. It's like all these, because all these things are happening in an interactive sort of kind of way, you know. So like for me, just for example, I was born male, but my gender expression now is very much feminine. My sexual orientation actually is homosexual. I am in a lesbian relationship with another trans woman. She's my wife. We got married 3 years ago. And my gender identity is female, is woman. You know, that was the incongruence that I had to deal with in my life. The incongruence between my birth sex, which was over here, and my gender identity, my innate sense of self, which was over here. And that incongruence I ran from for 40 plus years. And it was only until I embraced my true self and began my transition where the incongruence became alignment. And it's like that for a lot of trans people, for every trans person. And you know, what I always like to say too is that, you know, if you have a trans person in your life, or if you have a trans person, you know, as a colleague, what have you, friend, family member, you know, understand that, because that's the journey that you can't necessarily walk with them. You can walk along with them, but you can't walk in their shoes necessarily because you're not trans. But it's having an understanding of what that is. So all these things, you know, play into it. And I think, you know, from like a gender expression perspective, what I always say to the folks in New York City is, you know, I always ask them, like, what subway line did you come on to come to this training? And they would tell me like the A train, or, you know, the D train or something like that. And for those of you that are familiar with the New York City subway or aren't, you know, think about BART maybe if you're from the Bay Area, or MARTA in Atlanta, or I forget what they call it, or Metro in DC. You know, a train line, if it only has 2 stops on it, one at the beginning and one at the end. If it's a binary train line, it isn't going to really help anybody, right? It's not going to get you where you want to go. You know, the continuum is important. All the stops along the gender expression train line, if you will, are important because it gives people an opportunity to express their true selves. And that's what gender expression is all about. You know, this whole notion of a binary existence isn't really what we're talking about here. It's about a continuum, and I hope that helps you understand that if this is, you know, the first time you're hearing it. But again, we all exist on this framework, and it all informs our language. Now, if any of these terms are new to you, if you wouldn't mind revealing, please let me know. Because, you know, a lot of these are out there. I think the one term that, you know, it's probably the newest of all of these, arguably, is, and this is not an inclusive list, please, no. There are glossaries of terminology everywhere on the internet. Some are better than others, arguably, but I mean, cisgender, you know, that's, you know, that arguably is the newer of all of these. And, you know, and at the end of the day, cisgender, well, we needed a term for not transgender, you know, and, you know, I wasn't going to say, you know, my not transgender friend, Dina. I was going to say, you know, it's my cisgender female friend, Dina. You know, if I don't know that I would ever introduce her like that, Dina, if you're on, I would never say that. It's just like my friend, Dina, but you get the idea. So, cisgender, Melissa just shared, and thank you, Melissa, for sharing that, and Alva as well, that they hadn't heard of cisgender before. And you know, cis is it's the Greek. Cis means same, and then like trans means across. So cisgender, cis, same gender, transgender, across, you know, from male to female, female to male, transgender. That's kind of how it's rooted in, and that's as much of an English professor as I'm going to get. I promise you, but it certainly helps. Some people haven't heard the term intersex, and thank you for sharing. You know, intersex for a long time, decades ago, went by the term hermaphrodite, which is very pejorative now. And intersex in a very broad way means that when a child is born, they have either external and or internal sex organs of both sexes are present at birth. That's essentially what intersex is. And you know, I don't want to get too clinical, but I think it tells you all you need to know. If you need to dive into it a little bit more, the Internet of Things can certainly help you with that. So I'm hoping that, Lisa, that very broad brush definition of intersex helps. But here's the thing with trans, and I hear this all the time from well-meaning people, but if someone uses the word transgender incorrectly, you know, as a trans person, I can tell you that raises up, and my radar goes off. It's like, beep, beep, beep. They don't know. Maybe they want to know, but they don't know. They could be very well-meaning, but they just don't have the language down yet. I mean, to be candid, guys, my publisher and book coach, who I've been working with for 4 years now on this book, he still says transgendered, and I'm always correcting him. So it's not coming from a place of malice. He just hasn't, you know, kind of absorbed it yet into his brain. But what I like to say is this, you know, when we say transgender is an adjective, you know, when we say transgender, we say transgender person, we say transgender people. You know, we don't say, oh, there's a bunch of transgenders over there. No, we don't say that. You know, transgender people or transgender individuals. You know, that's how we use the word. We don't use transgendered. I'm not transgendering. I've heard it. I'm transitioning. I'm not transgendering. You know, I talked about transgenders, and if you saw me on the street, you wouldn't go, oh, there goes a transgender. It does not sound wrong. I mean, really, it sounds wrong, doesn't it? So anyway, that's kind of how we use it. And that's how to properly use it. because again, if you don't, it's funny how these little subtle messages get sent when you don't even realize it. But that's how important language is, right? And that, because it can get easily interpreted, perhaps incorrectly, by the receiving person, the trans person. You may have not meant it to be, you know, to sound wrong or to be hurtful. I mean, I hope not. You wouldn't be in this webinar if you didn't, if you felt that way. But you know, it's that sort of thing. So that's why it's important. So like language matters. You know, there might have been a time, and for all I know, clinically, some people might still say transgenderism. God, I hope not. It's being transgender. And I have to stop for a second. Sarah, I love what you said. All pronouns are not names. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And thank you for sharing that. And every time I look over here and I point, it's because it's on a different screen that I have over here. It's not like Sarah's right here next to me, although it feels like she is. Anyway, so, you know, we don't talk about sex change. Oh my God. You know, we don't talk about, well, are you pre-op or post-op? We just talk about transition. That's what we talk about. You know, it's nobody's business whether, and it's not your business, for the record, to know if, you know, what a trans person's, you know, physiological characteristics are, or what they're choosing to do medically. No, that is not where you go. And then, you know, when we talk about birth sex, we talk about assigned or designated male or female at birth. These are the kinds of words we use. You know, and at first I understand, for those, the uninitiated, this might seem, wow, I got to kind of, you know, go back to my English classes. You know, it's not that difficult, especially when you understand where it's coming from. Okay, so the next thing is pronouns. And Josephine, I love what you shared. I choose to inform the person if they ask about my transition, what I have completed. I'm very open and honest because it's all about education and understanding. And you go, Josephine. Thank you for sharing that. You know, that's educating on the spot. That's taking an interaction and turning it into a teaching moment. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So when we talk about pronouns, you know, for the chat, and let's talk about this. How can the proper use of pronouns be used as a vehicle for systemic cultural change in your organization? For example, are pronouns on your signature, on your email signature? Are they allowed to be? Is there any corporate guidance that has been issued relative to that? Should there be? These are the kinds of things I'm talking about, you know, and that's where, you know, and I understand some of the popular media that, and, you know, certainly in the darker parts of the web, you know, people are taking, those that don't get it have been taking great exception to the use of pronouns like that. I know none of you do, but that's one of those things that can make a difference. And, you know, can get people to see what's happening in the organization. So, but specifically, as you're responding in chat, and I'll check your responses in a second, let me just go through some of this stuff. You know, it's like Josephine was saying, use transgender person's chosen name. You know, it doesn't have to be hard. You know, I'll real quick story. When I first came out, I was in charge of about a 35-person group. And on my first day, and on my first day, I looked like this. This is my ID from my first day. That is not my real hair, that's a wig. My real hair was way too short. But anyway, you know, in the spirit of full disclosure, so I'm sitting, I had a meeting with my team for the first time. You know, now they had been met with HR the day before and all that kind of stuff. But this was the first time they were seeing the real me for the first time. And I said, you know, and I kind of stood up there, I didn't have an agenda. And I said, does anybody have any questions? This is me. and it was quiet. It was quiet for what seemed like an hour, but it was really only about 10 seconds. And one of my employees said, with this like scrunched up look on her face, "What do I call you?" And she wasn't being snide. She was being honest. She did not know what to call me. So I said, "Well, you can call me Stephanie." And then I made a joke about it. You know, you can call me anything you want. You can call me late for dinner. I don't care. I'll respond to just about anything. But just call me Stephanie. I'm good with that, you know? And, you know, and when it comes to pronoun usage, here's a pro tip that I've come across, and I just love it. You know, it's like, so I say here, use the pronoun that matches the person's authentic gender. Well, you might not know. You might not know. It's not that easy. So what I always like to say is, you start the conversation by letting the person know what your pronouns are. You've immediately changed the tenor of the interaction. You've already taken some of that tension out of the air, because you're, you know, as you introduce yourself, "Hi, I'm Stephanie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. How are you?" And then that gives that person the freedom to say, "My name is such and so, and my pronouns are such and so." But the big thing is, you don't ever assume. You just ask. You just ask. But you don't have to ask necessarily if you lead with your own. And I think that's very important. I think that's very important to understand. And then you need to, and where the English gets a little difficult for some folks is that some individuals will use the pronoun they and them, to reflect their internal sense of self. And you know, that can get just a little take a little getting used to, only because, you know, it just kind of changes the syntax in your head a little bit, you know, about, you know, an English sentence. But it does. I can tell you from personal experience, it's not hard to get used to, but it's something that you should be aware of, and you can see it. And this is from the Out and Equal piece, by the way. What's your pronoun? And that's the piece I was speaking glowingly of a bit ago. These are the different types of pronouns. And, you know, and then this is what it looks like built into a sentence. Now, I'm not asking you to go off and chart sentences like your English teacher did when you were in 5th grade. But these are the kind of things that, the pronouns that are in common use today. Obviously, he and she and they and z and zir, they're out there. Especially amongst those that identify as non-binary, gender non-conforming, and how you use it in a sentence in proper English is what you see here. I will post these slides as a PDF, so you can have these as a reference as well. I meant to mention that to you up front. I have yet to do that. Excuse me, I'll make sure that I do that afterward. Josephine, I like what you said. The later generation picks up faster than us older folk. I hope you're being really, you know, older in quotation marks, folk. But I think it's important, and I'm really loving the chat. I'm really enjoying the interaction, guys. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, I want to be standing in front of you in a big conference room, but we can't do that. So if this is the second best, it's pretty darn good. So let me talk a little bit more about continual education. And really that, I think the ERG plays a big role in a lot of this, because you can be the education vehicle as in terms of not only trans, but the entire LGBTQ plus community within your organization. A couple of polls right there. Does your LGBTQ ERG have a clear set of quantifiable goals that contribute to the business objectives of your company? We did that at New York Life, and I know we're not the first, God knows. But I think clearly it's important, and any of you that have been in corporate long enough know it's about what's the value that you bring to the enterprise, right? And that's no different, you know, in your business units, it's as well as your ERGs. ERGs are no different, you know. And then, is your ERG a part of the new employee orientation process? Are all of your ERGs a part of that? Let me know on the poll, please, and I'll take a look. because you're a part of that cultural evolution. You're the change agent. You're the beachhead for the newly transitioning or the new trans employee or non-binary or gender nonconforming employee that comes to your company for the first time. You know, I mean, and you know, that would be, and that's part of what their research is anyway, I would think. You know, I mean, right away, right? You know, if I'm looking to join your company, and I'll just use HP for an example, I want to make sure I know what your CEI score is. I want to make sure that you're cool on all the trans inclusive health benefits and all that kind of stuff. And I also want to see that you have a vibrant employee resource group. I know you do, but I'm just using that as an example, right? That's important. I want to know that before I even sit down and interview with HR. You're a source of education for the employee population at large. And I will say this, you're the source of education for the employee population at large, and not just during Pride Month or an LGBTQ History Month. You're a source of education for the entire year. Yes, of course, you bolster your efforts during Pride Month and during LGBTQ History Month. Of course you do, but you know, you don't go to sleep for the other 10 months of the year, right? You don't. You just don't. You know, and I think it's very, very important that you raise up your ERG, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the advocacy piece. And I've only got about 5 minutes left, so but I'm getting down toward the end. You know, be an advocate for your other ERGs. You know, do things together. I'm sure a lot of you do that already. You know, when it's Black History Month, perhaps you're doing some. I remember we did a lot of things. I remember we did one thing with our with our Black employees ERG during Black History Month around Bayard Rustin, gay man who was part of, you know, Dr. King's universe and the change agent that he was as a gay man, as an out gay man. You know, it's that sort of stuff. Because then you're all, you know, you lift up each other, you lift all of yourselves up together, right? And you're stronger. You know, you're members in each other's ERGs. You should be. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I was a member of all the other ERGs in my company when I was there, and I think you should think about that in the same term as well. It's about enlarging your voice. That's what this is all about. And when it comes to trans issues, you know, it's not hard to educate yourself. It's not hard at all. Because we have this thing called the internet, and you can see what the issues are. You can see what the challenges are, you know, and a lot of those challenges have the current administration, I'm not going to get political, but it's just a fact, you know, have changed the game, the playing field for the trans community. It's important for you to understand how that's happened, and what does it mean. Jess just asked me a question, what does a beachhead mean? My apologies. So what I mean is that's the first place you want your ERG to be the first place that a new trans employee at your company looks to perhaps engage and feel at home. Okay, that's what I mean. Beachhead, I guess, is an older term, sorry, from, you know, like, you know, the military, where, you know, we have to establish the beachhead to resist the advance of the opposing forces. So, but what I mean here is it's making yourself available as the first place a new trans employee, for example, can land to feel comfortable. You know, that I am amongst people of like mind. And if you have other trans employees that are in the building or a part of the ERG, that, you know, that's a great place, a great person to have lunch with for the first time, or have lunch with the, you know, one of the co-chairs, you know, and kind of start to get the lay of the land a little bit of what the company's like. That's what I mean by beachhead. I hope that helps. If not, email me, I can tell you more. Okay. So, oh, good. Mara, I know you have to run. I'm glad I'm glad you came. Thank you. Let's see here. So, you know, so from an ally perspective, you know, for those of you that consider yourself allies. I've had people that I worked with didn't even know they were allies, and they were allies until I actually told them. You know, they were like, well, Steph, I'm just your friend. I said, oh, no, you're more than that. You know, you're an ally for me. You have a pride flag in your cubicle, for crying out loud. You know, you have, you know, when I did this coming out panel, you had the big, you know, 8x10 flyer, you know, posted all over your cubicle. I mean, you're being an out ally, and they're like, really? I didn't know that. So, these are just some of the behaviors, ally behaviors. I mentioned Jean Marie Nevada previously from PFLAG National. There's a great resource at, and I'll put it in the chat when I get there afterward. Just take a look at it. It's straightforequality.org/trans. There's a wonderful how to be a trans ally PDF there that is great. And it goes into a lot of this stuff. And what I want to say really more than anything is, so, you know, you can either be an ally with a small a or a capital A. And what I mean by that is moving from an ally to an advocate. You know, you're going to be confronted with teaching moments where somebody's going to say the wrong thing about a trans colleague, and you know what's wrong. Well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to correct them and have a conversation with them about it? Or are you going to let it go? Well, if you let it go, you're not really being any kind of ally. But if you sit the person down and have a conversation with them, as pointed as it needs to be, that's where you're moving to the advocate space. And that's where you're beginning to make a difference. So, you know, and I know I've thrown a lot at you today, and I'm just about at the end of my time, you know, especially with language and stuff. And like I said, I'll put my slides up. But the thing I want you to understand is, if there's any doubt in your mind, oh my God, what do I do? Just let your behavior, your interactions with your fellow human beings, who just happen to be trans, you know, ride on the rails of your own personal sense of integrity, excuse me. And, excuse me, that was my timer telling me that I'm out of time. But as I was saying, let your personal sense of integrity be your guide. Let that be the thing that helps you and guide you through these interactions. Because if you do that, you're never going to make a mistake. You're never going to make a mistake. You're always going to be coming from a good place, from your heart, with all these conversations. And what I like to say, and I love this quote, it was from Maria Hinojosa. She was at the Forum on Workplace Inclusion a few years back. And I love what she said. She said, learn to see yourself as the person most unlike yourself. And I'd like to leave you with that today. This is all of my contact information. Please reach out to me. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me an Insta. Hit me up on Facebook. Shoot me an email. You know, I'd love to come to your company and chat more. Whatever, if you have any other questions, if you need some help, I am here. So thanks again, guys. It's been great. You know, you have, as the airlines like to say, you know, you have a choice of airline carriers, but thank you for choosing our airline. And the same with me, you know, you had a choice of webinars to come to. Thank you for choosing mine. I hope it's been a great time well spent. It sure has been for me. It's been great to getting to know you guys digitally and virtually. And I wish you all the best in all your future endeavors. Thanks so much. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.